Today on the show, the opposition in the United States should be soaring high in approval, and yet they are in the dumpster, in some cases even worse than the leading party. We're going to talk about that and just why there is a notion that there is a such thing as the Uniparty in the United States. I'm your host, Sal Assante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. Let's get right into the show today. So today I want to keep it short and sweet as we have quite a few developing stories that are still on the horizon, whether we're going to go back into war with Iran, whether our economy here in the United States is going to continue to falter or go back on the rise. So kind of want to take a step back and look at the overall numbers that are showing for what is the opposition, the Democratic Party at this point, and what might be going on with that. So as I was looking into it, the approval ratings for Trump in general they always say they're at an all-time low, but they're somewhere around mid 30%. And so I was curious, is the Democratic Party even lower? In some cases, they are much lower. In some cases, they are a little bit higher. But in general, it's almost about the same, believe it or not, somewhere around mid 30%. Poll had it in early April. It looks like around 28% favorable. At the end of the day, both parties at this point are extremely unfavorable. And why might that be? Well, the favorability trend right when Trump got elected in 2024 was actually really high for him. I believe it was at his highest, almost at 50% or so, give or take, probably closer to mid to high 40s. That being said, looking at what has happened under the Trump presidency, whether you're talking about the continued rise or staying high of prices, whether you're talking about the unrest that came from the ICE raids and the immigration reform, so to speak, that tried to take hold here. Whether you want to talk about the Iran war, whether you want to talk about military operations around the world, or whether you want to talk about the Epstein files or other files that were supposed to be released that really was a giant blunder. Generally, looking at all of these as a whole has shown a massive drop in the favorability rating of the president and his party. And what you would expect if you're following politics long enough is that there would be a coinciding rise in the opposition. That hasn't happened. What we've seen is both parties staying really low. I think the Democrats have come up at least a little bit since the election in 24. I think that was their lowest overall approval. They were somewhere in like the 20s. That being said, I think there's a reason for it. And my speculation is that there are 3, possibly 4 reasons for this. And combining all of them gets you to a point where it's kind of understood that there is no real path out of where we're at right now. So my first speculation is that there was a overcommitment to the demonizing of President Trump during his first term. That started, of course, with, the Russiagate scandal and the ousting of him twice being impeached. But you can carry it through all of the term. Think back to when CNN was having massively high ratings due to the fact that they were just bashing Trump all day. And in a lot of cases, there was actually high performance. Take COVID out of it. There was massive economic performance. There was all-time highs in basically every sector in terms of whether you want to look at the stock market or all-time highs in the unemployment rate, highs actually being lows in that case. But you can go on and on about really good points that Trump had, and yet he was getting bashed all day long. And come into his second term here where there actually is a lot to criticize, but the mainstream media as a whole doesn't have a leg to stand on because they demonized him in his first term. Now, this might not be the highest factor, but I think that there is something to say in terms of a dulling of the senses, so to speak, for the electorate as a whole. What I want you guys to keep in mind is that at this point in the electorate makeup of the United States is that roughly 45% of voters are calling themselves independent at this point. What that means is if you're to take the people at their word, they are willing to be swayed by either party, and no party is calling their name enough for them to register as Republican or Democrat. What it also means is that, generally speaking, the closer you are to the middle, the higher chance you're going to be reelected or that you're going to have a decently high approval rating. Now, when you get into one of the more I think, impactful reasons as to why the Democrats are not soaring in the polls. And I think, number one, you got to keep polls at a more than an arm's distance. They are never correct, I think, as we've seen in the past. But when you're looking at their policies and what their proposed policies are, in most cases, they are so out of touch with the everyday American. And with that being said, running on platforms like extreme wokeism or extremely weak policy, or honestly talking down in an elitist fashion. And in a lot of cases now, the popular Democrats are so-called self-proclaimed progressives. In other words, they're very close to being, we'll say, socialist candidates. When it comes down to it, the regular American, the average American, is not going to see that as an attractive vote, because what they hear is that more of their own money is going to be taken away in taxes. It's going to be more government control. And at the end of the day, most regular average Americans want the government involved less in their life, not more. And this is a problem with both parties. And I think that's why both parties are struggling right now. Whether you want to look at, on the Democratic side, push for higher government intervention in domestic politics, whether that's economic, whether that's pushing quote unquote woke agenda, you know, pushing the LGBTQ kind of rhetoric, or critical race theory, like all of these things that were talking points for the Trump ballot in 2024, but are honestly true. True to a sense that there has been a large push to get Americans to conform to what is a new normal, and most Americans don't really see it as a new normal. But you can also look at the Republican side, where you're seeing a push now, especially with the Iran war, to push for curbing of free speech when you want to talk badly about our government or our government's ties to Israel. Whether you want to say that the Epstein files should be fully released and unredacted. You're seeing a large push on the right now, using a lot of wording that was used by the left or mainstream media during COVID. Almost verbatim, the same words. Whether you want to talk about the fact that our government seems to be, under the Republicans, okay with financial spreading of money, so to speak, in ways that benefit them or are able to cater to their donors. And of course, all of the wars, at the end of the day, both parties are utilizing the government as wings of their own party and not looking out for the best of the people. Like I said, I think that most Americans, and 45% of independent voters, I think most of those people are looking for the government to play less of a role in their life and not more. I think one of the biggest problems that we see here in America domestically is our healthcare system. Nobody seems to want to reform it in a way that's going to be beneficial to the people. They always want to be beneficial to themselves, whether it's for talking points or whether it's for money. And, I think one of the biggest failures over the past 20 years or so in our politics was the tying of healthcare to your employment status. And you saw a really large chunk of that occurring in COVID, when tons of people lost their jobs, tons of people lost their healthcare, and therefore didn't have the care that they needed, whether they were dealing with COVID or dealing with an outside issue that did not get the treatment that it needed. Now, there are many reasons for that, of course, but my point here is that even the Republicans who are in power, and especially under Trump, many of them, if not all of them, are pushing for a healthcare system that's still tied to employment. And what that does, I was actually thinking about this earlier today, is that you have no competition. If you are put, say, we'll take the United Healthcare as an example. They were a big tie-in to the last couple of years, especially after the assassination of their CEO. But there are many corporations, many companies that are using United Healthcare as their main provider of health insurance. Not only their only provider. If you're put in front of a piece of paper, or piece of paper is put in front of you, I'm sorry, and that piece of paper says that you're going to have healthcare, it's going to be covered 50-50 or 70-30 or whatever it is by your employer, but it's United Healthcare. Are you going to turn that down to go shop for private funds, or are you going to take advantage of the fact that your employer is covering more than 50% of your healthcare? And odds are you're going to take that deal. You don't have any ability to shop. You don't have the real ability to go out and try to find a better deal, because at the end of the day, healthcare is so expensive that cutting down that cost by 50 or more percent in most cases by having it tied to your employer is worth it enough. The only problem is when there is an actual incident that comes along, you have bad healthcare or your healthcare decides to deny your claim or any number of reasons that this could be a problem. And I think that given the fact that neither party is really going for any other option, I mean, the only other option out there is from the quote unquote progressives that are saying, yeah, we don't want employer healthcare. We want a fully funded Medicare. Well, to me, that's even worse than every single person is tied down to a single healthcare provider and you don't have any choice. You don't have any, ability to go and shop yourself around, find yourself a better deal or find better coverage. They're just going to take more money out of your taxes and give you less and less care. And I think that that is a very good example, at least in my opinion, for just how much of a kind of uniparty that we have. There's really no push to change the way things are going when things are clearly not working out. My last feeling as to why the Democrats haven't seen a large rise is that their inability to criticize Trump on his most heinous actions, and that, in my opinion, being the Iran war and the Epstein files, has really, I think, taken away from their credibility. Now, that's not to say that they're not criticizing him, but, when there was, for example, the George Floyd stuff or the ICE protests and stuff like that, in most cases, what you're seeing is people who don't have a great grasp of the actual policy or what is actually coming down and really just screaming, rah, rah, bad Trump. And when you don't have a good criticism, you don't have an ability to tie in the main of the population to your argument and you're just screaming, you turn off those people that are in that independent block. And that's more so where I stand. It's not that Democrats aren't criticizing, because I believe on the whole they generally are. There are some that are totally okay with the funding of Israel, totally okay with the Iran war. But, most of them are pushing against the full release or pushing for the full release of the Epstein files. But at the end of the day, not having the right talking points is killing them. And I think it's killing our elected officials as a whole because, it's easy criticisms that can be made on the Iran war. Getting to a point of boots on the ground, you're spending too much money. If you're spending too much money, how are we able to properly take care of our domestic issues at home? You don't really hear those talking points. You just hear the talking point that, Trump got us into another war. Well, okay, what does that mean? What are the ramifications? I think that's got to be talked about more. The Epstein files, the inability for the Democrats to come out and just say how many elites are being protected. A lot of cases who you're hearing that from is people like Thomas Massey or people like Rand Paul. This should be coming from everybody. It should be coming from even the right. But if you're looking at why the Democrats aren't seeing a rise, I think that plays a part of it, and what it kind of comes down to is what I mentioned a few times at this point, and that's the semblance or the feeling that there is a uniparty. The uniparty being the fact that even though someone like that may be an elected official in the Democratic realm is coming out publicly and stating that they're against the war, they are against the way that ICE has been working, they're against the way that the Epstein files released, any number of things over the Trump presidency, they may come out and say it, but at the end of the day, they're voting differently. They're voting to what their real true feelings are, or what their donors are asking them to do, any number of things, but there have been plenty of basically just the non-progressive, the moderate Democrats, a lot of them that ended up getting voted in the last cycle, and presumably a lot of them that will be elected in this coming cycle, that voted for these wars, voted for these actions, or maybe not voted for them directly, but did not vote for the war powers, right? Like so many of these issues are coming up where the Democrats at least have the opportunity to stamp their name of disapproval on certain policies, and they're not doing it. And so when you look at it and that 45% of the middle of the country is trying to get a gauge, like myself, for example, I would look for anybody in the Democratic Party to come out with just some common sense and some ability to counteract the Trump talking points, but at this point, it's going to be the Republican Party, and counteract that with good, solid proposals for legislation and maybe some sort of proposal for change in the future and bringing on a new way of life here in America, especially catered around the hope that we have a better healthcare system. Not that it has to be something like Medicare for all, but, possibly detaching from the employer-based or the Medicare for all sentiment and going for a more free market approach. Anything that would make me think, this person is trying to think outside of the box or try to get us back to a stable place to grow from. I would love to see that, and I'm sure independents across the board are looking for something like that, and it just hasn't happened yet. So at the end of all this, again, I don't want to keep this too long. I already went longer than I wanted to, but I think that the reason that the Democrats are not seeing numbers increase the way that they probably should be, given Trump and the Republican Party's ineffectiveness in this so far, this second term of his, the reason is they're shooting themselves in the foot, kind of just like all politicians fail. The inability to act on what promises were made, or really the lack of a backbone when trying to stand up to lobbyists or stand up to outside influence. It's biting both parties in the foot. And now we're at this point where most of the country's unhappy with both parties, and where do we go? I'm going to say the same thing that I've said for quite some time now, but it's time for that next generation to step in. It's time for, I don't think a third party really will ever work out, but if there is, now is the time to step in with a platform that is truly looking out for the best interest of Americans and not so much caring about people around the world when we are suffering as a body here in the United States. We are suffering enough. So I hope we can get to that point. I hope that someone comes out to make the independents, much like myself, come out and vote based on, promises are weak, but a real laid out platform that is actually articulated completely and has an idea of where we're trying to get in the future, rather than throwing out talking points to try to get the hits on YouTube, get the hits on TikTok, and really get us bought in as Americans. So that's all I got for you guys today. There will be no show next week. Got a little bit of stuff to get done on my end, so I'll be back in a couple weeks. Hopefully we have some developments to talk about. And until then, hope you guys stay safe. There's no crazy news that comes out, and you all stay well. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.
I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.